Thanks to everyone who is here. I know we have 2 remote, perhaps 3 if Representative Finney happens to be on, but appreciate everyone being here. We will jump into our hearing momentarily, but I'll start with just a moment on bill introductions. Does anyone have a bill introduction? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Representative Gail Finney, I would like to enter 22 RS 2510 as a committee bill.
Thank you. Any questions? Do you have a high level what it refers to?
It covers diagnostic treatment for breast imaging.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Is there an objection? And without an objection, the bill is introduced. Further bill introductions? I actually have one, and it is RS 2742, and it would direct $1 billion of the funds that we talk about in surplus into CAPERS. That would be inclusive of the 253 that was directed from the interim committee and in the governor's report. So enough in addition to that to be $1 billion directed to CAPERS. Are there any questions? Is there an objection? And without objection, the bill is introduced. I was hoping Director Conroy wouldn't be wearing a mask so I could see his reaction, but in lieu of that. Further bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move to our first item of business, our one item of business today, which is a hearing on House Bill 2481, and we would begin with an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. House Bill 2481 is a bill that authorizes on and after July 1, 2022, that a member of the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, or KP&F, who was previously employed in in-state non-federal governmental employment can purchase a service credit for that in-state non-federal governmental employment for purposes of their KP&F retirement service credit. The member would have to submit proof of that employment to the retirement system in a manner acceptable by the board. The member would either elect in writing to either have additional employee contributions deducted from the member's compensation until all quarters of such service has been purchased, or the member could effectuate the purchase by means of a single lump sum payment for all of that in-state non-federal governmental service. Members of CAPERS have authority in statute to purchase service for in-state non-federal governmental employment under KSA 744919R. So this would just allow that for the KP&F folks as well. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions, committee? Representative Riley.
Thanks for the quick overview. Do we have a number, or is that going to be coming up, of how many people we're looking at here?
I believe either CAPERS or the proponents would have a number. I don't have that number, but I think they'll get you one.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. From that, I believe we will walk past the fiscal note, in that the fiscal note would be determined in the actuarial cost, which may be in our neutral testimony. So I will start actually with our neutral comparee to help us lay the groundwork, and would ask Director Conroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I may have had my mask on, but I was going to call for the AED when you talk about numbers like that. Certainly good numbers to hear. So. Thank you for the opportunity today. I think you have some testimony on House Bill 2481. It is that KP&F service purchase, as David has just gone on and just explained it. Just a couple other little things here. Of course, service is one of those things, one of those factors in that formula for police and fire. Of course, it's that credited service times the final average salary, so their compensation. And then it's the KP&F has a multiplier of 2.5% regular capers is 1.85%. So for each quarter of year a member works, then they're credited as one quarter of service time that will ultimately help with their retirement benefit calculations. Currently, KPNF members have the opportunity to purchase service credit, military service credit, and that's the only area that service credit that they can purchase besides actually serving and through active duty. So they can purchase military service time, but again, that's the only one. So this would allow an additional opportunity for KPNF members to make a service purchase. And again, as David said, this bill would only be for in-state, non-federal governmental employment that otherwise meets the requirements of an employer in the KPNF statutes. And so, for example, a city who employs law enforcement officers certified through the Law Enforcement Training Center would be examples. And there's just a handful of cities within Kansas that aren't affiliated with KPERS and hence KPNF. The bill provides a member could not purchase that service. It was already credited as service time in another pension plan. So if they had some service credit in that local plan, let's say, they would have to withdraw their contributions related to that service to be eligible to purchase the service in KPNF. So they couldn't get, in effect, double service credit for that time in another system. And then in terms of the calculation on cost, each member would apply for that service purchase, provide the necessary proof of the service to make sure they're eligible. And as David indicated, they could either do a single lump sum payment, or they could do it through additional payroll deductions. And if they choose the purchase of service through the payroll deduction, then they would have an additional contribution deducted from their paycheck for each quarter that is purchased. So if they needed to purchase a year of service, then they would make double deductions, or they'd make that additional contributions for those four quarters. Currently, the employee in KPNF contributes 7.15%, but the cost of the purchase is individually actuarially required. So it's based on the member's age and their salary at the time of purchase. So it's not the salary, maybe if they worked for that other employer 20 years ago and their salary was, $25,000 30 years ago, they would have to purchase it at their current salary right now, as opposed to what it was maybe 20 years ago, whatever it may have been. And so that's, again, it's actuarially calculated, each individual as best as humanly possible. It's actuarially neutral. So the individual that's making the request for the service purchase would pay the full actuarial cost, so it doesn't move the needle on the employer contributions or on the unfunded liability. And so it doesn't increase the employer contributions. The individual, again, is paying the full lug on this additional service. So there's no actuarial cost, and there's no really administrative costs. We can absorb those. Most of it's just informational materials. We believe our information technology system could accommodate it. So it'd be just a handful of people that would probably be eligible for that. Again, probably the one example comes to mind. The city of Wichita has their own retirement plan. So somebody who might have had service there and then later switched to a KPNF employer, they may be looking to purchase that service as an example. In the whole, there's about 7,000 KPNF members. We get about 90 inquiries a year about service purchase. And right now, out of those 7,000 members, we have about 39 that are currently purchasing service. So it'd be military service that they would be purchasing. And so, again, this would probably only apply to I would guess a handful of people at any given time, probably less than we're probably talking 2 or 3 at a time, maybe a little bit more, particularly as it's phased in, but it'd be very minimal and no actuarial cost. Be pleased to try to respond to any questions.
Representative Riley.
Okay, thank you. This is a question that I'd probably have you come back to after this one person testifies, but part of this story, the one person from Olathe here is discussing that they had 4 years worth of retirement, and then they weren't, it sounded like they couldn't get that back. I thought at one time we said that if you retired and you had some money sitting in there, you could get it all back.
If you were in Capers or KPNF and you had some service time and then you quit, let's say, that money always remains with you. You can apply to get it. Interest is only paid for a certain amount of time, and then it kind of becomes like an inactive account, but the member,
No interest.
well, it only runs for a few years, and then at that point it stops.
And then the point was brought out on this, I don't know whether this person's going to be here or not, that they would be able to take money out of their 457 plan to buy those back. I thought that those 457 plans were pretty well locked in and you couldn't just take money out of them.
I believe you can even, for a regular Capers member who had some service time sometime, and it's a little broader in regular Capers, it can be out-of-state teaching service, it can be Peace Corps, it could be military. They can use the 457 account then to purchase, since it's part of their other retirement system. The federal government does allow that.
Okay.
Other questions, committee? Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive my ignorance. I want, if you could, to just back up and explain the core concept of the bill. Specifically, what does it mean to purchase service time?
That's right. So maybe, for example, military service, or in this case, so maybe you served in the military 2 or 4 years. Some people serve a lot longer in the military, but some people may just serve, 2 or 4 years. And so that means they can purchase that service, the actuarial cost, and then that helps then give them, for example, in regular Capers, additional service credit. So when a Capers member gets ready to retire, it's how many years did they serve? So if they purchase that, in that case, military service, it would add to that number. And then it's, what their salary is, and then the multiplier. So it's one of those key factors, that years of service. So it adds to that years of service, which ultimately impacts their lifetime retirement benefit.
Sorry, can I ask another question? So does it ultimately affect their retirement age then, if you can then add into the service time?
For example, it's a good question. For example, in KPNF, and depending on the age, there's some thresholds. They either, it's age 60 with 15 years of service, age 55 with 20, or age 50 with 25 years. By purchasing that service, that adds to those years of service requirement. So, the age requirement's still there, but in terms of qualifying for that part of normal retirement of years of service, it does add to that.
Representative Garber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So a person who retires from the military, they can't use those years in this program, can they? Can they add to their Capers?
If it's a basis for a military retirement, they cannot. If it's military time that they, for whatever reason, maybe weren't in long enough or whatever, if they're getting that military retirement, then they can't buy that service.
I was hoping that's the way it was. Well, actually, I was hoping it was.
Other questions, committee? I have just a couple. I think one of the win-wins we're looking for is where it's cost neutral and we can provide that additional flexibility to our KPNF members. So to the question Representative Garber was asking, if I was in another Capers covered position, would that be the same where if I switched from a Capers group for a period of time and then that plan shifted in some of the other things we're looking at, I wouldn't be able to purchase that time that was in a capers covered position.
That's correct. I mean, generally, then that's right. Eventually, when a person retires, they would get a capers calculated benefit on those years of service, and then they'd get a KPNF calculated benefit on those years of service. And in effect, they get two retirement benefits, one regular capers, one KPNF in your example.
So thank you. And if there are other thoughts from other conferees in the future, I will welcome those. Similarly, I know one of the things the board is contemplating, which is easy to get our heads around, is the change in the rate of return assumption. So while it's calculated to be actuarially neutral, if I were able to make a purchase today and then on July 1, the rate of return was reduced from 7 3/4 to something lower, that would effectively have a cost for everything, but I would have had a slight advantage to get in before that date.
I think that would be correct, because it's all those actuarial assumptions that are in place at the time of the purchase.
And then it is based on my salary at the time of the purchase. Is it possible in that scenario that I could have been employed at a time or at some period of time that would determine a final average salary higher than my current salary?
Under KPNF, it's the highest, I think, 3 of the last 5 years. Capers, it's the highest years whenever, whatever that was earned. But capers, it's the last, or KPNF, it's the highest 3 of the last 5. So I guess depending on the circumstances.
And how long I would work. So might it be useful to base it on the final average salary that would be calculated at that point? I'm not sure, just trying to think through what would be the most accurate way to be cost neutral on that. And the final salary, whatever the current salary is, may be the most accurate. Similarly to the question Representative Osmond asked, if I bought service and it changed my vesting schedule to where now I could retire at 55 or 50, I assume that is also in the actuary's calculation to say not only do I need to pay for the additional years, there's a value to being able to retire at a different age, and all of those come out in the wash.
Yes, that's correct.
So thank you. Other questions that the committee has? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. Appreciate that. Since I jumped into neutral testimony, I don't have anyone else listed as appearing neutral. Is there anyone else who wishes to appear neutral on House Bill 2481? Seeing none, we will move to the proponent testimony, and we will begin with Mr. Ed Klump. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ed Klump, I'm here representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Kansas Peace Officers Association. We brought this bill to primarily, what brought it to our attention is the inconsistency between the ability of a member to buy or purchase past service time in capers versus KPNF. I think what you're going to hear from the sergeant when he testifies is that he contacted capers about purchasing this past time with Wichita, and they said, well, if you were in capers, you could, but in KPNF, you can't. And so what this bill in essence does is levels that playing field. It takes the rules on what can be purchased in capers and applies them equally in KPNF, so that regardless of whether you're in capers or KPNF, there's the same playing field there as to what you can buy. I'm not sure if that's 100% across the field, but at least relative to this non-federal government prior work time in a state or local government in Kansas, it would apply. I think it's important to understand also that in Kansas today, about 1/3 of our officers are not under KPNF. They're under regular capers because their local governing bodies have elected not to place them under KPNF. And so this creates a lot of discrepancy, oftentimes with different agencies in the same county where the benefits are significantly different. And so we're always looking for places where, especially with no cost to the system, we can bring those more in line with each other so we can get rid of some of those inconsistencies. So that's in a nutshell what all of this does. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth because we move forward than I've ever seen anything move forward in neutral with the prior explanation. So I think it's our understanding, no cost to the employer. There's no cost to the system or pretty neutral anyway. The cost is borne entirely by the employee who is electing to purchase the pass time. And we feel that's fair to let them have that option. Mr. Chairman, I don't profess to be anywhere close to understanding actuarial studies and things like that, but on your question about using current salary, for example, if we were to use the current average salary, that'd be even lower than current salary, and I think that would increase that discrepancy. That's my non-mathematical or accounting mind saying that just seems logical to me, which doesn't always what the rules happen. So we encourage you to pass this bill. We think it's a good benefit for some employees. We think it's something good to offer them. As Mr. Conroy stated, there's not a lot of people that take advantage of this. And the more time you're buying, the more expensive it is to buy. And so there's less people buying it when you're dealing with a lot of time. But it's certainly helpful in somebody like the sergeant back here who has a few years in another retirement system. And it's certainly a good recruiting tool for us when we're trying to recruit military people that are not in the military as a career, but they're in the military for 4 or 5, 6 years, and they want to move on to another career. And it's very helpful for us in a recruiting situation to let them know that they have a possibility of buying that time at their expense if they choose to. So I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee questions? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, but a correction. Things will move forward when in neutral if you're on a hill, which this bill may be.
Sometimes they'll go downhill, though, Representative.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. This has been looked at or considered, hasn't it, over the last couple of years? I mean, there's been question about whether this was possible, yes or no?
Not to my memory.
No?
I don't
Okay.
recall us ever having a bill on this particular issue.
Okay.
I'm not saying there's not, but I don't recall one. I've been
You've been
representing
around
these
for a little
associations
while.
for about 15 years, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Our next proponent is Sergeant Ossens. If you can correct first my pronunciation, and welcome to committee, and any introduction is also welcome in addition to your testimony.
Oh, thank you. And we're one of the few people that got it right out of the gate. So.
Okay.
My name is Robert Ossens. I'm a sergeant with the Olathe Police Department. I have been since about 2003. Prior to that, I was an officer in the Wichita Police Department beginning in 99 to 2003. So I have a little bit less than 4 years of service with the Wichita Police Department. When I first came to the Olathe Police Department, I was told that while I could transfer my retirement from Wichita, but since it was not KPNF, the only thing I could do with that money is either take a cash payment out and lose a good chunk of it to taxes, or put it into my 457 plan. I chose to do the latter. I didn't know that there was anything else I could do about that. Years later, I heard from our human resources representative that if you were military or I don't know exactly what it was, but or had some CAPERS credit, you'd be able to buy that back into the KPNF plan. I inquired about it, and I was told that since I was with the Wichita Police Department, that's not something that would be able to transfer from their retirement system to the Olathe KPNF plan. So I just resigned at that point. I was relatively early in my career. I just said, well, I guess I'm just going to have to work a few extra years longer. I got to thinking about that as years went by, and I got a little bit more experience. So I inquired with my HR reps, said, what can I do about this? And they said, well, I have no idea. You're going to have to contact the CAPERS folks in Topeka. So I did that in a very generic way, sending an email to, I think, their public email address, and was told that although that you can do that sort of a purchase if you are in CAPERS, you can't do that in KPNF. So I asked them, what can I do about that? And they said the only option is a legislative option. So then I contacted my representative and my senator from where I live. They referred me to Mr. Klump and got the ball rolling from there. And he was a big help. I'm very impressed with the way this is going, so I obviously would encourage this because it would help me, but it would also help. I can think of at least 2 or 3 people in my department that would also help, that just never took the time to look into it the way I have. So I also do know we just had one person retire who had about 5 or 6 years with the Wichita Police Department that ended up just losing that service credit. So I think it would be helpful.
Committee questions? So I have one that may be hard to answer, and that's not my intention. But, and I also think I know the answer, but just want to have that discussion briefly. Knowing that it is cost neutral to Capers and the state, it would seem the benefit to myself or you purchasing that is moving some of my investment money into a plan that's run fairly well with a 7+% return assumption on a payout through life, which may exceed what I could safely achieve on my own without that. Again, at no cost to the state, but that then makes it an attractive purchase for me to be able to do. So not meaning to put words in your mouth, but wanting to kind of walk through your thought process on what makes it an attractive alternative.
Well, the main attraction to me is if I did nothing and this bill didn't exist and didn't get passed or anything like that, I would have to work another 4 years to be able to retire. As it is, if this bill passes, I would be able to retire. Not that I would, I'll probably work a little bit longer, but I would be eligible to retire when I turn 50. If I didn't, I'd have to work a number of years past my 50th birthday until I would be eligible to retire.
Great, thank you, and thanks for letting us know, although now, knowing that we probably want to make you keep working, staff shortages, no, just kidding. Thank you for walking us through that. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your work to bring it to us this far.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep, appreciate that. I don't see any other listed proponents to speak. Is there anyone wishing to appear before the committee? I would direct the committee's attention to 3 proponent testimonies that have been submitted under the written section, including Dennis Phillips with the Kansas State Council of Firefighters, Casey Slaughter, Kansas State Lodge Fraternal Order of Police, and Greg Smith, Sheriff Liaison, Special Deputy Sheriff for Government, Veteran Crime and Victim Affairs, and in my freshman class as a legislator. Anyway, that wasn't on the sheet, but you probably didn't want that listed. But I certainly would direct the committee's attention to that testimony. If there are no further proponents, are there any opponents to appear on House Bill 2481? And with no opponents, is there anyone else wishing to appear on 2481? And seeing none, we will close the hearing. Thanks to everyone for bringing that to our attention. That is the business that we have before the committee for today, so thank you, and we are adjourned until our hearing on Wednesday.